Alone had become a staple in my life. In all our lives. It had been exactly 124 days since they had trapped us all in the place that we all used to call home. They turned our houses into prisons, and our rooms of solace slumber into cells. They told us it was for our own good, our own protection, which I can understand. Protection from the disease was vital. Protection from the virus was key. But do they not understand that solitary confinement will cause disease of the mind? I remember the day that the suited men visited our houses in the old street, demanding we hand over our house keys. I remember the strong scent of cologne, cigarette smoke, and metal that they carried as they stormed my home. I remember the last gleam, glint, and glimmer of the sunlight as they closed the front door, the jangle of my keys in their hand, taking the key-ringed picture of my loved ones, not knowing that that was the last time I would see them, as they locked me in to settle into nothing more than eternal safety. Their deep voices still echoing through the room, as I heard the harsh screeches and shouts of my neighbours, trying and failing to protest, just as I had done. But they would always come back stronger, their words of warning echoing through my empty house and rowdy street. No contact with anyone else was allowed. Forbidden. You should understand this. But this night, this present night, where the hands of the clock tickled the 12 o'clock mark, my anxiety began to rise, and the stirring fire in the pit of my stomach began to storm into rage and panic. The walls were closing in on me, and I became frantic. Just a minute of fresh air, I told myself. Just a minute of fresh air is all I would need. For a while, I tried to nurse my panic, switching from rocking back and forth on the cold, hard wooden floor to pacing back and forth the living room, to rapid, unlaboured breathing until I was left staring at my hands in silent, hot tears streaming down my face, feeling like my soul had left my body. The only thing indicating that this was not actually the case was the constant, searing, hot pain of anxiety shooting upwards within the middle of my ribcage, over and over and over, like a harsh, icy dagger that held no mercy. A frantic panic began to wave over me, with a greater intensity than before. I had to get out. I had to get away. The men, having searched the whole house for any spare keys I had, left me no other choice. Without thinking, and with great impulse, I grasped one of my kitchen chairs and hit it hard against the window of my kitchen door, hitting the large window over and over with increasing hot fury. I let out my rage on the long patio door. I shouted as loud as I could with each hit, "Let me out!" I screamed harshly until finally it gave way, and I was met with a shower of slick, sharp shards of glass. I had broken it. I quickly took cover, huddling on the cold, hard floor with my hands over my head, the loud, beautiful twinkle sound of the breaking glass bringing me to my senses. I looked up and surveyed the damage. I thought for a moment. Of course, I was not in my right mind, but I tried to think as clearly as possible in my fogged state. With everyone quarantined, self-isolating and imprisoned in their homes, there was no chance that I would run into anyone if I went outside. If I took a walk for a moment, there would be no worry of bumping into anyone, no chance encounters, no contact with strangers. I was safe. A small, devious smile crept across my face. There was no chance of infection if the only infection I was entertaining was the battle within the mind. I took the kitchen tea towel and wrapped it around my arm to protect my skin from the glass, and made a clear doorway out of the smashed glass for me to pass through safely. I slipped through the damaged door, sneaking down the dark garden with sly intent, looking from either side over my shoulder for a reason unbeknownst to me. There would not be another soul in sight if my theory was correct, right? Why would they care, or even think to confront me? They wouldn't. They wouldn't be able to, even if they so desired. Encaged in their homes. Everyone was home, safe, scared, and to consider anyone else wasn't their concern. I slipped through my garden gate and made it to the lane that lay behind my house, the cool sensation of night air soothing my lungs. I let out a deep breath and let go of all my wound up stress as I looked down the dimly lit path. The amber streetlight gave everything an eerie vibe. With impulse controlling me once more, I began running, just as fast as I could, with no place or destination in mind, letting my feet and human need for escape and thirst for freedom guide my direction. I ran and ran, passing houses upon houses, streets upon streets. I ran until my legs began to give out and my throat was dry, until my chest heaved up and down violently and my hands began to shake. I bent down slightly, leaning on my knees, feeling my eyes tear up with relief. My throat now raw and rough with the constant whips of night air it had just endured. I collapsed to the floor, sitting there for a moment within the street, not realizing where my feet had taken me. For a moment, I sat there on the concrete, still trying to catch my breath. I let out a small giggle. Having a small sense of relief, until my breathing eventually and gradually was beginning to slow.
I guess you had the same idea then.
I whipped my head around, trying to locate the low, rough voice, holding my breath.
No one else would be out, so you'd be safe, right? Safe from the virus, from other people.
I was struggling to find my breath.
Not a soul in the whole entire world would be outside tonight, so why should you have to worry?
He laughed ever so gently, but there was an air of arrogance and self-gratitude in his tone. I couldn't see the person whom the voice belonged to. They seemed to be lurking in the shadows. I shook my head slightly, thinking my exertion may have been playing the trick on me. He laughed once more.
How could you be so stupid? Don't you know it's for your own good? Your own protection?
He said, in a voice that mimicked the PSAs that they played daily on the TV. I felt the warmth of tears falling down my face before I even realized I was crying.
But I bet it was getting to you. Began to climb the walls of your home, did you, honey?
I could hear what sounded like metal scraping along concrete.
Couldn't stand to stay at the same four cursed walls again. Stir crazy panic disorder, that entrapped feeling of losing control.
He paused for a moment, while I came aware of how my entire body was shaking furiously.
I know it too well, for you see, sweetheart.
I could hear faint fingertips tap on metal. If it was not for the deafening silence of our solitude, I could have easily missed the sound.
I too have urges,
he continued.
Urges I've been trying very hard to manage, but like you tonight.
I hear the taps of metal again.
My self-control has worn thin, and now I am seeking.
He paused for a second once more.
A thrill,
he said sharply.
I was hoping for someone like you,
he said. Desire filled his voice. I ripped myself from my state of paralyzed fear and was now sobbing softly. Feeling as though I was no longer occupying my own body, I forced myself to stand, to get up from the ground.
Oh, that's great.
The deep voice cooed.
It's so much more fun when they run.
Who are you? I called out. My voice was weak and shaken.
You'll find out,
the rough voice replied, convinced that state of mind had become my enemy and that I was imagining all this. Without another thought, I called back. Are you real?
You'll find out,
he replied, but this time I could hear a smile in his voice. You're bluffing, I said, straightening up. I tried to sound strong, but my hands shook profusely in contrast. He replied with nothing more than a patronizing smooth laugh and what sounded like metal scraping on concrete. My thoughts were rapid and quick. It was fight or flight, and flight kicked in. I took off running quickly, my feet taking me as far and as fast as I could manage. With my already tired lungs, I pushed ahead and tried to focus on my horizon, still sobbing softly as I ran. The shards of fear piercing through my stomach over and over. I passed a few streets and tried hard to find a place anywhere that I could recognize. But it was to no avail. I ran for some time, past lanes and streets, until I became exhausted once again, panting intensely. I crouched down behind a large bin, hiding just for a moment to catch my breath. I could hear the heavy thuds of footsteps in the distance behind me now. I tried to push down the intense, searing fear and took a few seconds to frantically think things through. I knew it wouldn't be long until he'd be gaining on me, and I could not run forever. I had to find help. I had to. I couldn't call anyone, because in my excited taste of freedom, I hadn't taken my phone with me. The footsteps were getting louder now, and panic began to replay its course. I knew I could not stay here for long. Closer and closer, he was coming toward me. I got up, shook my hands, trying to rid the sting of terror that lingered in my limbs, and looked around the dead street. There was nothing but moonlight, an artificial street lamp glow to assist in my turmoil. Thud, thud, thud. I realized that before I knew it, I would be in the shadow's hands. I knew I had no other choice than to call for help, to demand assistance. I ran down the street, screeching at the top of my lungs for someone to come to my aid. I stopped at every house, knocking on their doors and hammering violently on their front windows with my fist. I got to the end of the street, and this time, demanding a reply, I screamed as loud as I could, my screeches filling the night air, crying out for help over and over. I banged my fist against the glass, my hopeless sobs breaking my sentence. I began to cry, sob, and panic until I choked. But it was fruitless. No one, not even a single soul, came to my aid. There was not so much as a light turning on within the windows of any of the homes. I prayed for someone to help me, but why would they? There were grand repercussions if they tried to leave their homes, and even grander if they interacted with another person. Better to play dumb, right? But then again, I thought, even if they wanted to help me, like myself, they had been locked in their homes by the very people who claimed to help us, who often preached community and helping others. Even if they wanted to help me, they had no choice. They were trapped too. I slid down the wall in defeat. I sat in the front garden of a stranger's house for a moment. The intense pain within my throat from all the screaming was hardly bearable. Through the heavy panting, I could have sworn I could hear something. It was faint, but just about audible. I tried to pace my breath, to listen closer to the noise. Metal across concrete. All that screaming I had done had led the Shadow Man straight to me. I had mapped out a clear pathway and led him straight to me, clearly marking my location, ready for the kill. The faceless man's voice echoed down the empty street. It was muffled and barely audible. I had some time. I had no control of my shaking hands now, and the tingling sense of static fear had made my legs feel numb. I felt hopeless, exhausted and cornered. I tried hard to push down the urge to cry and admit defeat. Panic caught in my throat, and just as I had felt it was impossible for me to run any further, just as I had felt I had been defeated, I had an idea. I thought the very act that got me into this mess could be the very act that could get me out of it too. I looked around the stranger's front garden. There were random objects, from huge bins to metal bars to broken bricks and torn pillows. From the struggle with the suited men for imprisoning people inside their own home, I presumed. Without thinking, and with not even a few seconds passing, I grasped at the first thing my hand touched, and with all the strength, rage, and desperation I could muster, hit it against the bay window of the stranger's house, over and over, letting out a cry of rage. and after a few moments of perseverance and utter determination, the window shattered. But by this time, I did not care about cutting myself. I burst through the now broken window, the shards of glass decorating my skin with streaks of crimson. It was at this point I heard stirs and confused murmurs and yells from within the house. Feeling dizzy and disorientated, I ran out of the living room and up the stairs, calling out what I thought was, "Help! Please! I need your phone! Call the police! I'm being attacked!" But exhaustion was settling in, and I'm sure nothing but incoherent wails left my mouth. "What's going on?" I heard a woman's voice call out. She sounded scared and unsure. I stormed to where her voice had come from, and ended up at the doorway to a middle-aged couple's bedroom, their confused and bewildered faces staring up at me. "Please. Please," I said, panting. "Call the police." I felt as though I was about to collapse. "What? Oh my God. How did you get in here?" the man asked. "Please," I said, losing my vision. "There's somebody after me." "Help, Stan!" the woman called to her husband. They still remained far from me, still social distancing, and both stared at me, bewildered, until the man called Stan picked up the phone.
"I don't understand. How did you—"
"Please, just call the police. He's right behind me." I interrupted him. I closed the door behind me and felt the tears fall from my face. "The police station is literally around the corner. They should take just 2 minutes at most, okay?" The woman's voice was soft and gentle, but she didn't hide her fear very well. For a moment, I just nodded and stared at the floor until I clicked. "He's coming," I said. My stomach sank. I led the predator straight to them. I told them all about the man, and how he had been not far behind me, how he must have heard me screaming, and how he must have been right behind me when I smashed their window. "They'll just be a few seconds away," the woman said. "Hide!" I shouted out suddenly. "Hide! Hide! We need to hide!" "What?" "He's coming. We can't let him know that any of us are in here," I said to them. After enough coaxing and quick explanation, I finally persuaded them to take cover. I hid in their closet, the wife underneath the bed, and Stan was nowhere to be seen. Not the best hiding places, I was aware, but I thought they were just obvious enough that the killer would take a quick storm around the house and guess that we had fled and leave. Then, my rapid thoughts were interrupted by the twinkling sound of falling broken window and the crunch sound of boot on shards of glass. Stan's wife began to whimper softly from underneath the bed. I could see her trembling in my mind's eye, just how I had done. I said softly, "Please, please, shh." I said out of desperation, the sharp stabs of fear piercing through my ribcage. She managed to quiet herself as we heard the first thud of his footsteps ascending the stairs, getting louder and louder. killer walked past the bedroom and straight into the next room. There were a few moments of agonizing silence, and then the absolute whirlwind horror of hearing Stan plead for mercy, and then his life, and then the thuds and bangs of strength before the gurgled end that punctuated his life. I placed my hand over my mouth, trying to muffle the panic and tune out the utter shock I was feeling from the horror I had just witnessed. I heard the footsteps coming toward the bedroom. Stan's wife whimpered from underneath the bed once more. I did not tell her to be quiet this time. I knew better. The clank of metal and the rubber stretch sound of leather entered the room, his heavy footsteps edging closer to the bed, demanding authority. I listened for a few moments, hearing nothing more than his sharp, heavy breaths fill the room. I stared through the thin slit of the wardrobe door. I saw him, dressed head to toe in black leather. I could feel the thick tension in the air and sense his excitement. He knew. Just then, Stan's wife let out a muffled whimper, seemingly not able to handle the increasing suspense of the fear-inducing situation. I had lost all hope. He had bent down to the floor and violently dragged Stan's wife from underneath the bed by her hair, holding her upright, the glint of his knife catching the moonlight. I shut my eyes tight and held my breath. After a few moments of unbearable cries, whimpers, and the soft, wet sounds of Stan's wife taking her last breath through blood-filled gurgles, I heard her body fall heavily to the floor. I regretfully opened my eyes and saw the dark crimson pool move slowly across the wooden floor. This is when I found it increasingly difficult not to make any sound as I cried silently in utter terror and impending doom.
I cannot thank you enough,
he said, turning to look around the room.
Really cannot thank you enough, darling.
He said eerily, punctuating his sentence with a cynical laugh. But his voice was filled to the brim with pride.
Didn't I say it was much more fun when they run?
He said, still looking around the room, then stopping at the wardrobe. My eyes met him, and I shut mine tight. I stood as far back from the door as I could, praying against hope that the police would rush into the house and save me from my fate. My hand tightened around my mouth as I felt the silent tears run down my face once again. I dared to open my eyes just before a familiar scent hit me. The familiar scent of cologne, cigarette smoke, and metal had welcomed my demise. I was met with his glazed-over dark pupils and caught a glimpse of a small smirk just before he quickly ripped open the wooden door to the wardrobe and yanked me out from beneath the clothes. Screams filled the air, and the sound of a dead telephone tone.
We're sorry, the number you have reached is not in service. Please Please check the number or try your call again.
The office occupied by trained emergency first responders was quiet that night. Each operator sitting amongst one another chatting to try and rid the eerie tension in the air that the zero level of calls had brought, commenting on how they had not had a night this quiet in quite some years. Days passed, and a reporter stands outside the stranger's house, standing 6 feet apart from the cameraman, of course. The crisscross yellow police tape decorated the broken window behind her. I am stood here on 74th Lavenel Avenue, where just a few days ago 3 residents met their untimely end. It was said that this time it was not the virus that killed, but instead fellow man. 42-year-old Stan Lawson and his wife, Kathy Lawson, were stabbed 7 times, while the 3rd victim has yet to be identified. By looking at phone records, it was said that Mr. Lawson tried to call the police at 3:45 a.m. early Tuesday morning, but due to the panic surrounding 5G and the belief that it may have caused the virus, there was an attack on all 5G signals, rendering all phone lines and connections useless that night, meaning that the call did not go through. Police are now conducting an investigation to try and catch the attacker, but evidence is scarce. Please stay at home and do this. The voice faded away, as in the reflection of the only part of the bay window that was not broken could be seen a figure. A dark figure with glinting silver near to where his hand would be, underneath his leather coat. It was hard to make out his face in the reflection, in the darkness. A shadow man. The reporter went on in her somber tone, emphasizing the importance of self-isolation and social distancing while standing in the open air with her cameraman. The whole news report never aired that day. The footage the fallen camera had picked up was said to have been too gory. It really is difficult to catch a shadow.